Welcome to the podcast called The Battle for African Agriculture. I'm with Pat again, Pat Mooney. We had the first episode. I introduced him during the first episode, and Pat is a mentor to all of us. He was in struggle for a long time. He was a founder of ETC Group, the group which looks at new technologies as they come up and criticize, and kind of open the eyes of many civil societies about the pros and cons of any new technology coming. Pat was a very good friend of Dr. Toldo Brhan Gabriel and Dr. Marako Reder, which we cherish in Africa as two giants, who were working on biodiversity and seed issues. So I'm very much happy, as I said last time, to interview you past. And
I'm glad to
welcome
be
again
here.
for the next year. Pat, you often say the new technologies are being introduced as solutions, but often create new dependencies. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, it's a pattern I think that capitalism really pursues. That when they have what they call creative destruction, uh, uh, and a new technology replaces an old technology, and so on. It really part of the strategy of that is always to make sure that you don't lose control of your customer, that you
Mm-hmm.
expand your market and you maintain dependency on the new technology or move the dependency from the old technology to the new one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to me, that's absolutely a critical way that they do operate. Um, it's not so much a plot as it is simply economic logic, and
Yeah.
which feels like a plot to those of us at the receiving end of
Mm,
it all, no question.
Obviously. Um, let's talk about gene editing. This is very, very clear and present to us as a danger to Africa. I'm sure you've eaten injera, you
Yeah.
know,
Oh, yes.
in Canada and in Ethiopia a number of times. And
Yes.
injera comes from teff. And they have quite recently gene edited teff.
Yeah.
But gene editing in general is being promoted in Africa right now. How do you see it compared to GMOs? Is it a new trick or a genuinely different and effective tool?
I honestly think it's just a logical extension of the where we started with GMOs back in the
Mm,
1970s. I mean, when they began to realize they could do this kind of manipulation, it's a natural follow through. It certainly had how it functions is different in a sense. It's
mm,
a different set of technologies, but it's part of a logical continuum when you realize that life can be manipulated. And that was the
mm,
recognition from the 1970s, if not sooner. And it's what they are pursuing. Um, to me, frankly, the actual techniques that are used, they're important, but
mm,
they aren't surprising, and we in many ways we actually predicted this particular change back in the end of the 1990s.
mhm,
It was quite clear that once the big problem companies had was always that to maintain their market, to reduce their cost for that market, and if they could force farmers to come back to the market every year uh,
mm.
to buy new seed, that was a quadrupling at least of their profits. So
Yeah.
we knew they'd follow that. It never made sense to us looking economically at GMOs that
Mhm,
they would stop there because of it still was expensive for them to do it, and there were ways they could get around it. And it didn't seem to us that if you, in a world where we share most of our DNA with almost any creature you want to mention as humans, whether we're talking about fruit flies or
yeah.
90%
Mm,
similarities or monkeys or whatever, we are, as you know, there's so much genetic commonality to mammalian species and even other species, non-mammalian, that why do you need to actually go to another species to move something into move something into teff from wheat or from barley or something like that. Why would you need to do that? Because the genetic diversity of teff itself is such that it's
Yeah.
possible to manipulate it and get the diversity you want.
Hmm. We
So
have
that made sense.
yeah, we have over 6,000 accessions.
Yeah,
I know it's not varieties, but that's quite a lot, you know?
sure. And but again, within that,
Mm.
I mean, humans have, I think, DNA from 13 different species in us that have come into
Mm.
our bodies over the centuries or million, thousands of years, literally. And we've adapted them so that they are either dormant or they're useful to us.
Mm.
That happens customarily. And that doesn't mean that gene transfers from other species are safe. I'm not suggesting that.
Mm.
It means that we've survived 13 transfers. There may have been thousands or millions of transfers of genes from other species into human DNA
Mm.
over this time, but 13 of them have stayed and have actually been functional.
Mm.
And so it's not unusual for this to happen. But we also know that within our own DNA, what we used to call junk DNA in humans and other
Mm.
species, which is 90 odd percent of, some say 95, 97% of our DNA is so-called junk.
Mm.
That was the terminology of the 1990s.
It's
Um,
like a junk in the right
Not
meaning of the
useful.
word. Not useful,
Yeah,
yeah.
they
Okay.
meant it as junk. They meant it as it's not useful DNA. It's just hanging
Mm.
around.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
leftovers.
Mm.
And now they know it's not junk DNA. They know it's useful.
Mm.
And so we have and that DNA comes from is in a lot of other species. So again,
Mm.
there's no need to transfer material from one species to another. You really can change the DNA within our own species, whether it's ourselves as humans or teff as a crop.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I
So,
mean, they can interbreed the
yeah.
teeth that we have. Yeah, definitely. Um, Many African governments are pressurized, to loosen their biosafety laws. I know USAID was working actively on this. What do you think is behind the push?
Uh, I guess there's several pressures I think that make this attractive for the U.S. government,
Mm.
industry itself. One is definitely that there's more land in Africa that is perceived to be open and available
Mm.
than in any other continent at this stage, and because of that, many feel that this is Africa is the soil we can take
Mm.
for food production and for other production of other species, other crops,
Mm.
and for reforestation and so on around the world. So in Africa, from the European perspective, and North America really is relatively
Mhm.
close by. So it's uh, I think Africa is especially attractive for that reason. The land is attractive.
Yeah.
Secondly, and of course the climate is shifting and variable, but there's a lot of climate in Africa and a lot of diversity of climate in Africa
Mm. Mm.
that can be taken and adapted as well. And
Mm.
then secondly, of course, that Africa is seen as still a rapidly growing population, the fastest of any continent, and it's by far, and it's seen to have a lot of people who still are not tied up in the marketplace in the food system in the way that
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Asia is or Europe and North America.
Yeah. Uh, you know that there are a number of initiatives now to really appropriate African seeds. There are initiatives like VAX, you know,
Yep.
um, Vision for African Crops and Soil. There was an article quite recently by somebody called Alex, and he could clearly demonstrate that the purpose is just to call these seeds as orphan, underutilized, and a number of
Yeah.
names. Orphan
Yeah.
in whose eyes, underutilized by
Neglected.
whom?
Mhm. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
very important question. So it's not only the land. Now they are scrambling for our seeds also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also that, but again, a lot of the material that is held in African gene banks is also held in European and U.S. gene
Yeah.
banks.
Yeah. 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 Let's go to AI. The big horse in the house. The digitalization of agriculture that had driven farming, big platforms. AI is being hailed as a future. Who really benefits from this trend, Pat?
Well, it's more the present than it is the future. We are
Yeah,
dealing
yeah.
with it now, and it's very likely to become very much larger in the decades
Mm,
ahead, or in the days ahead. Sometimes it seems to be moving so
mm,
rapidly. Um, it's again a logical extension of the internet. It's what you could expect would happen. The ability once
mm,
Google started to have algorithms. I mean, it's basically capacity to produce very complex algorithms
mm,
to search through the internet and find information and distort it or develop it in any way it wants to. So that's there, and I think if I could step back a second here, to me, the issue is less the precise technology, because I can get very angry about Mendelian plant breeding as well, Gregor Mendel's plant breeding,
mm,
which was damaging to the future of agriculture, the disaster of the way in which we uh, define species and genera and so on through from the days of the Swedish botanists. The issue really is not so much the technology as who controls the technology. And
yeah.
and the I could feel pretty comfortable with some of our technologies that I find, like such as the Green Revolution's
Mm,
semi-dwarf varieties. I don't wouldn't have any problem with the development of semi-dwarf varieties of wheat or rice or maize. It's again who controlled that,
mhm,
and how it was abused by Western scientists, not even just the private sector, but everybody.
mm,
And so it really is who's in charge here. And we can't assume that it's just nice public sector scientists who are in charge either. I'm sure
mm,
Dr. Malaku and Dr. Tuwalde would be the first to say that, oh no, we've got to watch out for what the
mm,
Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research is doing as a public sector institution. We've
mm,
got to be aware of how public institutions, universities can also be manipulated by the private sector and by governments.
mm,
So it
mm,
really is how does society take charge of new technologies, not to prevent them from being developed so much, though they
mm,
would prevent some for sure. I hope they'd
mm,
prevent nuclear technologies being developed,
mm, mm,
but it is a matter of how do we make the decision about this is a safe technology, this is not a safe technology, this technology should be adjusted in certain ways before it's allowed to be entered into societies. This is how we withdraw that technology if we discover new things about it that are dangerous.
mm.
Here's how we make sure that technologies that we've abandoned aren't abandoned, but are kept available to us to bring back if we need to bring them back or added to the
Yeah,
mixture of
yeah.
technologies. Those are the kinds of issues that we have to address. And recognizing on the other side, there are these laws of technology introduction, which I think are absolutely critical. It's absolutely clear, I think, through the history of the Industrial Revolution. So going back 250 years, basically, we can say that the introduction of major new technology platforms and even some small technologies at some times, or seem to be apparently small technologies, can actually almost always do work against the interests of those who are poor and marginalized and benefit those who are wealthy.
Mm,
The Industrial Revolution made very clear that where it began in Britain and then spread into Germany and other parts of the world, that people, the poor, suffered. We actually saw a
mm,
decline in the stature of workers. They got shorter.
mm,
They
mm,
ate more poorly than before. They were driven
mm,
into disease-ridden cities to work
mm,
in factories rather than working on their farms. All of
mm,
that harmed people for generations, and
mm,
we can't claim that it was for the greater good in some way. Like, who of us now would say, well, we don't mind dying younger, don't mind our children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren dying younger because some seventh generation down the road might benefit from this technology.
mm.
And that's the
Yeah.
situation we were put in with the Industrial Revolution, was that. And
Mm,
that's continually still the same situation. So new technologies, I think, always work against the interests of the poor in favor of the wealthy, at least
mm,
for many decades, if not many generations, and maybe for all time, depending. Second, I think, thing to bear in mind is that a new technology doesn't actually have to be scientifically good or even successful scientifically or technologically effective to be profitable. It simply has to be
Mm,
sold. The new technology simply has to persuade governments and
mm,
later on consumers that this is good and new and better. So it's
mm,
the hype around the technology that's more important than the technology itself. So we have cases of many bad technologies that defeated better ones, but because they're being
mm.
pushed by major corporations for their purposes, they succeeded. And they became profitable.
Yep.
So, but
Yeah.
to me, those are the
Yeah.
issues
No.
around any new technology that we need to look at, and then who's the one that gets to say yes or no, and how do we recall technologies if they're not safe?
Yeah. And those who opposed technologies who are not useful to people are called the Luddites, huh?
Yep. I'm very happy to
um,
be called a Luddite.
um, let's go to another technology which you have written quite a lot and which it is has researched quite a lot, synthetic biology. It's moving into from labs to markets now. Could you explain what it is and why it matters for farmers and biodiversity?
Well, it's certainly a fascinating set of technologies, and
Mm,
they kind of do tend to blend together a bit at times. But so the key thing that we were concerned about initially was what was going to happen to crops in Africa, in fact,
mm,
and
mm,
flavor and fragrance crops, vanilla in Madagascar, herbicide related crops in Kenya, were things where we saw that synthetic biology would be used to replace those crops. And there were sometimes quite
mm,
profitable markets, even for farmers, because they could actually do an end run around them and brew the same the key ingredients of vanilla, for example, in test tubes and then in large brewery vats like beer or something to
mm,
grow the crop that way rather than growing it in the field. And that's still what's being pursued. And they're getting better at it all the time, and it's alarming. It's many of
mm,
these crops are quite lucrative, and they don't usually occupy a huge amount of land, and
mm,
they have been beneficial for where small farmers have managed to control that. They've been beneficial to those
mm.
small farmers.
I mean, how is synthetic biologically produced something differs from genetically produced through genetic engineering or GMO? How is
Well,
that different, or is it the same?
there's no transferring of genes as such. It's really a culturing process of brewing the core ingredients, the enzymes that are proteins that are necessary to
Mm-hmm.
make that commodity marketable. So work's being done on cocoa and coffee and tea now, to which are major crops, to try to brew them and avoid the embarrassment of child labor, or the
Mm,
embarrassment of having to pay fair prices, fair wages to farmers,
mm,
the destruction of agricultural lands and so on, or the diversion of agricultural land for food into commodities to sell to industrialized
mm,
countries. So it's very attractive to the industry to find a way to brew these core ingredients in vats in the north. So it's a transfer of the
mm,
plantation crops basically from the south to the north.
hmm. ETC Group has documented the role of big tech, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, in food and farming. How are they shaping the future of agriculture?
Sorry, say it again. How's the?
Google, Amazon,
Oh
Microsoft,
yes, yeah.
nobody associates them with agriculture. But you have documented the role of this big tech. So, in food and farming, how are they shaping the future of agriculture?
Well, it's they are shaping it now, of course, in that they are giving advice to farmers to how to grow their crops. They are selling information, selling back farmers information to them again to say, from your past production history, we predict that you can do this instead in the marketplace. So they're giving lots of advice now because that's simply the management of data, which they normally do. What's I think interesting is that if you actually talk to the major parties involved in the development of AI and with these gigantic companies, these trillion-dollar companies, it's amazing that we can talk about trillion-dollar companies now, which was unheard of before. That these companies that they probably don't even think about agriculture. They simply think about all the bits of data they can control and manipulate, and they almost inadvertently find themselves moving into agriculture because it lends itself to satellite surveillance. It lends itself to cell phone monitoring, and allows the high transaction costs of working with hundreds of millions of farmers around the world to be managed through algorithms and large data centers. So it's what was too expensive a thing to work with, which is food production around the world, now becomes something which is relatively cheap to work with. And so they simply absorb agriculture, same way Amazon absorbed the book industry, or Amazon absorbs selling clothing or something. It's simply some other thing that they naturally acquire. And that's scary because food is not t-shirts. Food is not some knickknack that people want to buy for the day.
Yeah.
It is something that keeps us alive and risks disappearing if we don't care for it. And that's why we should be frightened by that strategy and be alarmed that these gigantic industries are stepping on it, trampling, in danger of trampling agriculture without even particularly being aware of it.
Yeah, that's good, and that's very clear. I will come back to the connection between what I've asked you now and VAX a bit later.
Sure.
But how do you see these technologies interacting with existing power asymmetries in Africa's food system?
Well, I don't think that at the moment you can easily theorize all kinds of ways in which these technologies could be useful. I can get quite excited about farmers, peasant producers in Africa sharing information one with the other about the local market, about transportation options to get to the local market, about new pests and diseases that they see appearing, and getting advices from other farmers in other places who've experienced those pests and diseases before to help them understand how they can evade them or address them in some way. I can see the enormous benefits of farmers experimenting with different seeds, different varieties, and different crops, traditional crops, but still, not the customary ones, perhaps in a certain region, saying that with climate change, we've tested this and it would be useful perhaps for you to try as well. All that kind of information exchange among farmers and their immediate customers, especially in villages and towns and cities, that can be very useful. Getting access to all kinds of information as well. What do we think is going to happen to the weather conditions in the next planting season? What are the risks that are here? That kind of universal kind of advice, which is becoming increasingly available, can be beneficial to farmers also. It shouldn't have to require them to go to the private sector to get that information. They should be able to get, certainly climate and weather information should be publicly available, and is in many ways publicly available at this stage. And certainly the ability to decide who they want to exchange their own information with in their own closed systems of communications that they trust should be possible. So those things in theory can be good. The danger, of course, is that that's not what's being done, where companies are saying, well, we'll give you crop insurance. And you just we'll send you information. If you follow our guidance and do these things, then your crop insurance costs will be less, and we'll buy your crop at the end of this growing season, and so on. They can tie farmers provide those services that seem like they're good services, but where the algorithms that determine the information are not known, the biases are not known,
Mm.
And they lose control of their own information, and they lose control of their markets, certainly. And
Yeah.
that's what is happening, and what does not need to happen, and is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. If African policymakers are told you need these technologies to feed your people, how should they respond?
Well, that's yeah. I mean, again, if the technologies were the kind that was describing, the ones where we're agroecologists working together as farmers are able to share information with each other and plan together, that's yes, that's useful. What they're being told by Google and Amazon and Microsoft and the others is not useful. That's dangerous, and
Mm.
it's not necessary to get the benefits of this information sharing that farmers can do.
Yeah.
We need to compare two kinds of systems here, and I often
Mm.
describe it as either wide tech versus high tech.
Mm.
High tech is the kind of thing we see in laboratories, where scientists in white robes get together. I'm being cynical about this. And not all scientists are evil
Mm.
creatures by any means. I'm not suggesting that, but when they're removed from the reality of the day-to-day world, and removed from the reality of what farming is and how people make decisions and ecosystems in farming, where they can get together and in high tech say, well, we've developed this micro technology, this transferring of genes, for example, or this development of an algorithm, or this cell structure we can create. These small nanoscale changes, even not just microscale, but nanoscale changes that can be developed in a lab that can have actually global implications. They can be applied all around the
Mm.
world,
Mm. Mm.
and so the market is 8.1 billion people for these
Mm.
technologies, and that's high tech. And some of that again can be useful if societies control that.
Yeah.
The opposite to that is wide tech, where in fact it's what farmers do normally, which is they know they're living in an ecosystem, they know the watershed, they
Mm.
know the food shed. They develop changes which take into account all the diversity of that system, the whole wide diversity of their local system. So it's wide tech, but for the immediate realities that they live with, culturally
Yeah.
and ecologically. And to me, that wide tech ability to improve the food system is what really needs to be strengthened. And what government should be doing is finding ways to support farmers in that wide tech strategy, where the farm and just think of compare the kind of research we can get. In the case of the high tech researchers, what they're saying is that we will do field experiments, for example, and VAX is
Mm.
this kind of conversation even. We can do field
Mm.
experiments here, there, and around the world in different places. We will assess the possibility of using these ancient crops, they have all kinds of terrible words for them,
Mm.
traditional crops that might be useful today. We'll tweak these crops with new high-tech technologies and get them
Mm.
out to farmers. And they'll claim that we're looking at various climatic conditions, we're looking at different market conditions even, and our evaluation is this. But with the same communications technologies controlled by farmers in an agroecological environment, the capacity to improve the quality of the research is hugely higher, because suddenly we don't just have 50 or 60 or maybe even 100 different test plots around the world. We have hundreds of millions of farm families doing the research, sharing the information with one another, and
Mm.
actually able to, and doing it in a much more sensitive way, because they're not only evaluating soil and harvest yields and storability, they're evaluating nutrition, they're evaluating the impact of nutrition upon infants, upon
Mm.
nursing mothers, upon the whole generational grouping of the family is part of the evaluation as well. Perspectives
Mm.
of men and women as farmers to understand what's going on. So that the
Mm.
quality of the research is magnitudes greater than the quality of the research that can be produced
Exactly. Mm.
by the high-tech research labs.
Yeah.
And that
Exactly. Yeah.
can be harnessed by farmers themselves in their own
Mm.
organizations to
Mm.
to to help each other reach those goals. And that's what government should be trying to support, not
Yeah.
disavowing high tech possibilities, but recognizing that the real drivers and movers of real changes that can be much more effective, much faster, and much cheaper than with the
Mm.
industry folks, can be done by these wide tech possibilities.
Definitely. But starting from last week and even today, we're talking about the slower but it's sure accumulation of wealth by the few, by the corporations mostly, and they are consolidating the control of the food system globally. And also, through various mechanisms in Africa, through when we sign agreement with WTO or World Bank or IMF and whatever, they put some of these laws and regulations as one of the criteria for receiving money. For example, you have to join UPOV 91. Slowly but surely, the big companies are, um, what do you call it? Um, Consolidating the control of the food system in general.
Yeah, yeah.
But there is also resistance from the people. So, could you share a story of resistance where farmers or civil society successfully pushed back against corporate seed control?
Oh yes. Well, I mean, there are really literally hundreds of examples which we in civil society and social movements, I think, fail to recognize. The one that stands out most in my mind is one which shows the organic way in which we can work together around the world to do something, I think, which no one thought could be done. And let me say it as fast as I can because I can get very emotional and I can also take a long time to tell a story. But it was the battle over what we called Terminator seeds, which began in
Mm,
1998 when the patented technology was first identified. Center Group was the one that found the patents initially, where the seed was going to be developed, genetically modified seed
mm,
developed to die at harvest time, so farmers would have to buy new seed every growing season.
mm,
And we were able to move quickly initially, to surprising the companies and everybody by getting the Biodiversity Convention to declare a moratorium against the use of the technology. And then we moved
mm,
on to work with actually the Rockefeller Foundation to fool Monsanto and the companies and get, because Rockefeller Foundation was on our side on the issue, to actually
mm,
get the multinational corporations like Monsanto at the time, and Dow and DuPont and Syngenta, to agree not to use the technology. And they were embarrassed into it by confrontations with
mm,
civil society and the Rockefeller Foundation. So we were
mm,
very effective. But then the move was to overturn the moratorium. And the story could be told as a mystery thriller, but all
mm,
kinds of clandestine moves by all kinds of parties, and suddenly the moratorium was in a position where, through the normal legal processes of UN negotiations, it would be overturned kind of automatically at a meeting that was going to be
mhm,
held in Brazil in 2006. And we were told by everybody, our closest friends inside the secretariats of UN agencies, the governments that were on our side, were tearful at saying that we've lost. The procedures are such now that the moratorium will be overturned. And then
mm,
there was a scrambling effort by farmers organizations, by La Via Campesina, so all kinds of groups together around the world to try to protect the moratorium. And suddenly, when the meeting began in Brazil, what was supposed to be a defeat when the issue came up on the agenda uh, turned into a victory. All of us, for
mm,
no logical reason, for no normal procedural reasons, all the rules and regulations said we were going to lose. And the resources, Monsanto told me they had more than 100 people on European and North American and Brazilian delegations there as staff working to overturn the moratorium by themselves. And
mm.
so in huge forces, they were controlling the situation. But suddenly 7,000 farmers showed up outside the building and made it
Wow.
almost impossible for the buses of delegates to get in. They let them in. They didn't try to, it wasn't they made it difficult. They didn't stop them. And the protests inside the hall all those of us who were actually allowed into the hall was vast. And miracle of miracles, the chair of the actual negotiations at that stage was a very nice biologist in charge of the Irish Botanical Garden in Dublin, who at the beginning of the meeting said, "Look, there seems to be a debate here. Those who who are in favor of maintaining the moratorium, go to that microphone. Those who are against the moratorium and want to overturn, go to that microphone." And of course, the governments who wanted to overturn it didn't want to be seen as such. So that microphone was empty, and everybody lined up at the opposition microphone. And it goes on to a longer story, but it was overwhelming. Finally, after a day where the chair even weighed in and said he thought that the idea of Terminator seeds was disgraceful and a crime against humanity, that it was overwhelming. It was we maintained the moratorium. The industry was defeated, and Terminator seeds have still never been used anywhere in the world. Now that's partly because the technologies have superseded them. We knew now we have the gene editing and everything else, so they can get around Terminator seeds. But it was a major victory, and it was a victory that should not have happened, and it did happen because all kinds of people, and it was an organic movement. It was not a Cetra group leading everything. It wasn't anybody leading everything. It was all of us together saying this has got to be stopped, and we stopped it.
Congratulations again, Pat. I think we'll have our last episode probably next week. But thank you so much again. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.